Well, thank you, Mr. Acting Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'm glad we're having this hearing today. Talked a lot about last week's CPI numbers and confirm that the American economy does need help to be reignited. The Kansans I represent are still suffering under Bidenflation, and tax policy lays an important foundation for helping economic growth for everyday Americans. You know, families and small businesses have suffered for more than 2 years under the failings in this economic policies of the Biden administration. Inflation's up 5.5% since Joe Biden took office in January of 2021, much higher than any of his predecessors over the same period of time. And instead of addressing this issue, the president in his budget proposed $4.7 trillion in tax increases at a time when Kansans are already paying 14 cents out of every dollar they earn in direct federal taxes, not including the taxes they have to pay through the purchases of businesses that ultimately pay taxes from the income from Kansans. This is the opposite of incentivizing economic growth if we want to increase that amount. I mean, I do have a couple of ideas about tax policy that the president could put in place to make that important, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But one of the things I want to at least touch on that was brought up earlier, and talking about the difference between in theory versus in practice. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017. Obviously, it's sort of like an investment that you might make in a business, is that you change the tax code to make sure that you incentivize the behavior you want. And as a result, we've seen the economy take off and grow. So the first few years, you may have lower tax revenue, as mentioned by my friend, the ranking member, for the first couple of years, first 3 years that went into place. The tax revenue was down over prior years. But the last 2 years, we've turned the corner. That investment from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act raised over $200 billion more than the CBO estimated in 2021, and in 2022 raised over $900 billion in actual tax receipts, more than what the CBO had estimated. So obviously, we're seeing some positive results out of that by making sure the economy keeps going. So I mentioned there's a couple bills that the president could consider to help get the economy going. One's a bipartisan bill, the American Innovation and R&D Competitiveness Act, that restores immediate expensing for research and development cost. This legislation was part of the larger tax cut and economic growth package that we passed through Ways and Means last week, the Build It in America Act, and we reported out, has already been reported out of committee. It's a promising start. It'll change our tax code to help generate innovation and foster job growth so that we don't cede any more ground to our adversaries. Just as a point of reference, our main competitor, China, has seen its R&D investments increase 400% in just 2 decades. While the United States' share of global R&D investment in 2019 was 30%, China's was 24%. That's a far cry from where we were in 1999 when the U.S. was at 40% and China was at 9%. So obviously, we've seen a huge growth making those smart investments. Mr. Coleman, will restoring R&D expensing reduce the tax burden on new investments, and how that helps for economic growth?
Yeah, I think, yes, Congressman, it will. It's especially a big deal when cash flow is tight and as interest rates are increasing. That is certainly the case. I've been hearing, particularly from manufacturers, engineering firms, architecture firms, technology companies, that it certainly would be helpful.
Well, thank you. And a second thing we need to do, talking about tax policy, we need to focus on what's being bantered about by the Biden administration on the OECD Pillar 2 tax scheme that the administration's been pursuing. Basically, what their proposal is that the OECD would dictate what U.S. companies pay as a tax rate on operations inside the United States, and actually would be detrimental to U.S. tax receipts. So according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, if this global implementation of the global minimum tax as defined in Pillar 2 is implemented, the United States will lose $120 billion in tax revenue that'll be lost. And even if the United States changes its tax code to match and to copy what the rest of the world does, we'd still lose $58 billion in tax revenue. So businesses are going to lose money, and we're going to get less tax revenue in the United States. That's just a poor policy, and we need to make sure we don't proceed down that route. So I know I could go on for a lot longer, but I'm out of time, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.